Hi everyone, this is Yana Smakula and welcome to another Hero Arts video tutorial. In this video, I'll show you how to do partial background stamping using Hero Arts Bold Prints 6x6 cling stamps. I'll be using the irregular grid stamp for my project. I'll also show you how to do ombre stamping on a round object, such as a flower, and we'll share a few more card making tips along the way. So let's get started. Here's the stamp that I'll be using to create my partial background print. This is a regular grid stamp. There is a fantastic example using this stamp in the Hero Arts catalog. It was stamped in dark brown onto light brown and looks like desert. Really cool. To me, however, this design looks like a city map, like a city grid map. You have your streets, your city districts, your city pipelines or metro lines, whatever you want this to be. I mean, this is a really cool background and I think it works beautifully for travel theme cards. You can have greetings from, say, New York sentiment, or you can have we moved type of card with it, or I miss you card, where you or your friend moved to another city and you stamp that city grid in the background. Lots of options. So this is a 6x6 stamp. It's large enough to be used for portrait or landscape cards. But what I'm going to do today is I'm only going to use a part of it to make a partial print for my project. I want to heat emboss this design onto white cardstock and to do some heat emboss resist ink blending. So to do that, I'm first going to treat my paper using an anti-static powder tool. This eliminates the static and grease from my fingers on the paper and prevents embossing powder particles from sticking to areas that are not supposed to stick to. So basically, this tool and this process just helps to keep your embossed images nice and clean. Now, I'm not treating the entire piece as I will only be using the center of this panel, but if I were to heat emboss the entire panel, I would treat all of it. Next, I'm going to use clear sticky ink and ink out just a part of my background stamp. I usually use Versamark ink, but my Versamark ink pad is too dry and I'm waiting for a new one to come in the mail, so I'm using my older but still juicy embossing ink pad today. So go ahead and ink up just a portion of the stamp. I'm inking the center only, so not inking the entire background. I'm going to go ahead and place my cardstock panel on top. I rotated the stamp at an angle just to be able to get the part of the pattern that I wanted, and I'm making sure not to press everywhere. Usually you would press all over the panel to have a perfect ink transfer. For this project, because we're doing a partial stamping, I'm only going to press down in few sections. So I'm making sure to press in the center and avoid pressing on the edges. And here's what the stamped pattern looks like. Because we used clear sticky ink, you can't really see it on the paper. I'm not sure how well it shows up on the camera, but the ink is there, and now I can go ahead and add embossing powder on top. I'm using Hero Arts white embossing powder and adding it onto my stamped paper. Now that I have it in place, you can see the pattern a little better. Now, it's not a perfectly stamped background, but this is what we're going for here. Now, if you got some embossing powder where you don't want it, or if you want to erase some of the lines and not heat emboss those, you can carefully remove the powder from your paper using a dry paintbrush. Lately, I like to use a flat brush. I'm able to clear my paper better this way, but a round brush works well too. Just make sure it's dry. After you've cleaned your panel, go ahead and heat emboss it with a heat tool to melt the powder and set it in place. So here's our first partial embossed background. I'm going to set this one aside and heat emboss a few more. I want to make a couple of cards, and I'm also not sure what color of ink I'd like to use for the ink blending, so I want to make sure to have a few of those heat embossed backgrounds to try a couple of colors out. So I'm going to repeat the same steps as I did the first time and heat emboss my second background. Now comes the fun part, adding color. I'm going to grab a few colors of ink and a mini ink dabber to apply ink onto my backgrounds. You can use ink blending tool, like the kind of ink blending tool you would use with distress inks, but I like to use the mini fingertip dabbers as they're small and thus allow me to add ink to smaller sections, and I need to be able to add ink to smaller sections for this particular project. Now, I don't label my dabbers. I probably should, but I just keep them in a little plastic container and just grab one with the most appropriate color. I'm going to use soft olive ink for the first background and blend quite a lot of color. The white heat embossed lines, because they are embossed, they resist the ink, and I'm only able to add the ink onto the paper where there's no embossing, making my embossed design pop. Now I'm blending lots more ink in the center because this is usually the section of the map that is darker. To me, this is like a higher density of whatever the map represents. So I'm making it darker there. Like if you look at a real map and you see darker sections where there's, say, more elementary schools. So the section is darker because the density of the schools is bigger. And the other sections are lighter because there are less elementary schools there. I'm not sure if I'm doing the best job of explaining this, but this is how I picture this background, and this is what it looks like to me. So, let's pretend there's a lot more card makers living in the center of this map than on the edges. See, that makes such a better example. Now, the second map, I'm using a pool color and again blending a lot more ink in the center and a lot less on the edges. This way the map sort of dissipates on the background and I think it looks quite cool. So like I mentioned before, I wasn't quite sure about the colors I wanted to use, so I made quite a few different backgrounds. I used soft olive, pool, tide pool, soft granite, butter bar, and hot pink. I also have one more stamped just in soft granite, just to see how that would look, and I also did one where I blended rainbow of colors. Here's an example on the screen right now. Now to turn these into cards, I decided to add a few flowers to each and a simple die-cut hello sentiment with an additional sentiment saying things like I miss you, we moved, etc. To stamp my flowers, I'm using You're So Lovely stamp set and two colors of ink, butter bar and soft apricot. I'm also using my mini Misty for this technique. So I want to have an ombre look on my flowers, but I can't do that with an ombre ink pad as the ink pad sections with different colors of ink are linear in there, so they go on a straight line. But I can do the same thing by using two ink pads and inking in a circle. So first going to ink up the flower with butter bar. This is a lighter color of ink in my color combo. And then use soft apricot to ink up just the edges. Once I stamp it, you can see the inside is lighter and the outside is darker. The ink blending isn't perfect, but this is where the double and triple stamping comes in handy. I'm inking the image with a lighter color, so butter bar in this case, and first double and then triple stamping this flower to help the colors blend. Now this looks a lot better with a nice and gradual transition from yellow to apricot. I'm going to stamp a few of these just so that I have enough to make 3 cards, and I'm going to stamp a smaller flower and a few leaves. I'm using just soft apricot for the smaller flower, although I'm again double stamping it, and soft olive for the leaves, and also double stamping my images. I'm going to use matching dies to cut these images out and have them ready for my cards. Now this is a little time consuming since I have so many images here, but I'm enjoying this. I'm always happy to spend a couple of extra minutes, or a couple of extra hours in my craft room. I'm also going to die cut the hello out of black cardstock. I first wanted to die cut it out of white, but when I cut it out of white, it becomes, lost in the background. So I went with something very contrasting, black. The die that I'm using is from the Stamp and Cut Hello set. To create my additional messages, I'm going to heat emboss I miss you, home is where you make it, and we moved, come visit in white embossing powder onto black cardstock strips. I've also treated this paper with an anti-static powder tool, and you can actually see the powder there. To remove it, use a simple pencil eraser. Now, I wouldn't recommend using a baby wipe. I find it leaves marks on the paper. The I Miss You sentiment comes from the same Stamp and Cut Hello set, and the other 2 sentiments come from the Town Essentials stamp set. I've already adhered my grid map panel onto a card base, and I'm going to foam mount 1 large flower and 1 small flower on top. I'm using foam adhesive, and I always try to use foam adhesive for my projects as I feel that helps the elements to stand out and be more visible and defined on the project. For the leaves, I'm using glue, and I'm going with multi-medium matte adhesive. This particular adhesive dries matte, so even if I end up having some on the background, it's not going to show up much. I'll later use the same glue to adhere sequins. I'm going to add my die cut hello and then foam mount the white heat emboss sentiment on top. Now for this particular hello die cut, I used a double-sided foam adhesive and die cut an identical hello and just adhered my cardstock hello on top of the foam one hello. But the other 2 hellos, I simply adhered those using glue. No card of mine is ever complete without a few sequins, so I'm going to add a couple of clear sequins in different sizes onto the background. I'm scattering them around my floral cluster. I made 3 cards in total, and I still have plenty of ink blended backgrounds left to use later. Here's a closer look at the 3 projects that I made today. So this finishes this video. If you have questions, please leave them in the comment section on YouTube or on Hero Art's blog. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!